I was driving through western Nebraska in late November after spending Thanksgiving with my older sister in Colorado. I made the trip before, but this time I'd left too late. By the time I crossed into a stretch of highway near Ogallala, the temperature had dropped hard. The roads were nearly empty, and thick fog rolled across the fields like smoke. Around midnight, my gas light came on. I remember checking my GPS and seeing almost nothing nearby except a tiny roadside motel called Cedar Pines Lodge. The place had no reviews, just a blurry photo of a one-story building beside a dead-looking parking lot. I should have kept driving. The motel sat almost a mile off the highway down a cracked access road surrounded by dark trees. The sign out front buzzed weakly, half the letters burned out. One of the windows in the office was covered with cardboard from the inside. The moment I parked, I felt wrong being there. No other cars, no sounds, not even wind. Inside the office, an older man sat behind the counter, watching a tiny TV with the volume muted. He looked about 70, skinny, pale, with nicotine-stained fingers and watery eyes that barely blinked. The smell inside was awful, like mildew and old cigarettes. He stared at me for a little too long before speaking. "You staying alone?" That question immediately put me on edge. I lied and told him my brother was asleep in the truck. The man gave a slow nod like he was disappointed by the answer. He handed me a key for roommate. Actual metal key. No key card. Then he said something that still messes with me. "If you hear knocking tonight, don't answer the door unless it's me." I laughed nervously, expecting him to smile. He didn't. The room itself looked frozen in time. Brown carpet, old floral curtains, tiny box TV in the corner. The heater rattled constantly like someone shaking chains inside the wall. I locked the door immediately. At first, I tried ignoring the feeling in my stomach. I called my girlfriend, watched videos for a while, then eventually turned the lights off around 1:30. That's when I heard footsteps outside. Slow, crunching gravel, back and forth. At first, I figured it was the owner checking rooms. But after 10 minutes, the footsteps still hadn't stopped. Then came the first knock. 3 soft taps. I froze. Another 3 taps. I looked through the peephole, expecting to see the old man. Nobody was there. The parking lot was empty. I told myself it was probably kids messing around, or maybe someone standing out of view, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. I pushed a chair under the doorknob anyway. About 20 minutes later, I heard something worse. A woman crying. Not loud, more like distant sobbing. It sounded like it was coming from the room next to mine. I checked the window carefully. Still no cars outside. No lights on in any rooms. Then the crying suddenly stopped. Right after that, I heard a voice outside my door. "Please help me." A woman, barely above a whisper. "Please, he's gonna kill me." Every hair on my arm stood up. I reached for my phone to call 911, but before I could dial, another voice interrupted. A man's voice. Deep. Calm. "Don't do that." The woman instantly stopped crying. Dead silence. Then I heard footsteps walking away from my room. I didn't sleep after that. I sat against the wall holding my phone until around 3 a.m. when I finally worked up enough courage to peek outside again. The parking lot was still empty, but this time I noticed something beside my truck. A chair. An old wooden chair, sitting directly beside the driver's door. I know for a fact it hadn't been there earlier. That was the moment fear turned into panic, because it felt deliberate, like someone wanted me to know they'd been standing there watching me. I locked the deadbolt again and stayed awake until sunrise. Around 6:30 a.m. I grabbed my stuff and rushed outside. The fog was thicker than before. I threw my bags into the truck as fast as I could. Then I noticed scratches on the side of my vehicle. Long, fresh scratches, for lines dragged across the paint, and written into the dirt on the back window with a finger were the words, "Room 10." At first I thought maybe it was some sick prank, but when I looked across the lot, I realized something terrifying. There was no room 10. The motel only went up to 8. I jumped into my truck and drove straight toward the office. The old man was already outside smoking when I pulled up. I asked him what room 10 meant. The second I said, his face changed. Not confusion. Fear. Real fear. He walked toward my truck fast and told me to leave immediately. I demanded answers. That's when he quietly told me something I still think about constantly. About 8 years earlier, a traveling couple had stayed in room 10 back, when a motel had another section attached to it. During the night, the boyfriend murdered the woman inside the room. Brutally. The owner at the time tried covering it up because the motel was already going bankrupt. A few months later, another guest disappeared. Then another. Eventually, the entire wing burned down under suspicious circumstances. Room 10 no longer existed. But according to the old man, guests still reported hearing a crying woman outside their doors late at night. And sometimes people answered. I asked him what he meant by that. He looked me directly in the eyes and said, "The ones who open the door usually vanished before morning." I didn't wait for anything else. I drove straight back to the highway and didn't stop until I reached North Platte. Once I got there, I noticed something in the back seat that nearly made me crash. An old motel key, rusty metal tag, stamped with the number 10. I pulled into a gas station and threw it into the trash immediately. For weeks afterward, I convinced myself someone at the motel had planted it as a joke. That had to be the explanation. But about 3 months later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched the motel online again. Cedar Pines Lodge no longer existed, permanently closed. And according to local news archives, it had actually burned down almost 2 years before my trip there. I still have no explanation for where I stayed that night. And I never drive rural highways after dark anymore. I took the night shift at a remote motel outside of Cedar Pass, Nevada, because I needed fast money after getting laid off from a warehouse job. The place was called the Silver Ridge Motel. It sat alone beside a dead stretch of highway, surrounded by dry hills and empty desert. No gas stations nearby, no houses, just 8 motel rooms, an old neon sign, and miles of darkness. The owner, a heavy older man named Carl Bennon, barely asked me any questions during the interview. He just handed me a room key and said, "If anyone checks in after midnight, don't let them stand around the office too long." I laughed at first because it sounded weirdly specific, but Carl didn't smile back. The first few nights were quiet. Truckers mostly. Couples passing through. I'd sit in the office watching security cameras while an old box fan rattled beside me. Around 2 a.m., the highway became completely dead. No headlights. No sound except wind pushing against the motel walls. On my 5th night there, rain started hitting hard around midnight. Desert storms out there felt different. The sky turned almost black and thunder echoed through the hills like explosions. At 1:43 a.m., an old dark green sedan pulled into the parking lot. I remember the exact time because the power flickered the moment the car stopped. A tall man stepped out wearing a soaked gray jacket, mid-40s maybe, pale skin. His hair looked wet enough to drip onto the concrete. He walked straight into the office without saying a word. "Need a room?" I asked. The guy stared at me for a few seconds before nodding. Something fell off immediately. Not because he looked dangerous, because he looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in weeks. I handed him the sign-in sheet. The man picked up the pen slowly and wrote the name, Thomas Grady. Then he stopped moving. He was staring at the security monitor behind me. "You staying alone?" I asked. Still staring at the monitor, he quietly said, "You should lock that back door." I turned around instinctively. The office had a rear door leading toward the ice machine area. It was already locked. While I looked back, the man was still watching the monitor. "What's wrong?" I asked. He finally looked at me directly. "There's somebody outside your office." Every hair on my arm stood up. I checked the monitor again. The grainy black and white camera showed the back area behind the office. Rain pouring sideways. Trash cans moving in the wind. And for maybe 1 second, I swear I saw someone standing beside the ice machine. Just standing there motionless. Then lightning flashed and the figure was gone. I grabbed the flashlight Carl kept under the desk. The man immediately said, "Don't go out there." His voice sounded serious enough to stop me. "You saw somebody too?" I asked. He nodded slowly. Then he leaned closer and whispered. He followed me from the highway. My stomach dropped. Before I could ask anything else, room 6 called the office phone. A woman staying there complained someone had been knocking on her window. 3 slow knocks, over and over. I apologized and told her I'd check outside. The man in front of me suddenly stood up so fast the chair scraped across the floor. "Do not go near the rooms," he said. Now I was irritated more than scared. "Look, man, if somebody's messing around outside, I need to deal with it." He shook his head hard. "No, you don't understand." Then he pointed toward the parking lot. His car doors were open, all 4 of them. I know for a fact they were closed earlier. Rain poured into the inside of the vehicle, while thunder cracked overhead. The man looked genuinely terrified now. That's how he lets you know he's close. I asked him who the hell he was talking about, but before he answered, the office lights shut off completely. Everything went dark. The storm killed the power. For maybe 5 seconds, the only thing I could hear was rain hammering the roof. Then came 3 knocks, directly on the office window beside me. Knock, knock, knock. Not loud, calm, controlled. I froze. The man whispered, "Don't look." But I did anyway, and I wish I hadn't. A face was pressed against the glass. Not distorted, not monstrous. Just a normal-looking man, smiling slightly in the rain. His skin looked extremely pale under the lightning flashes, and his eyes didn't blink once. Then the office backup generator kicked on. The lights came back instantly. The window was empty. I ran outside with the flashlight, despite the man yelling at me not to. The parking lot was deserted, except for rainwater flowing across the asphalt. But when I passed room 3, I noticed muddy footprints leading along the motel walls. Bare footprints, like someone had been walking around without shoes in the freezing rain. The footprints stopped directly beneath room 6's window. I knocked on the woman's door and asked if she was okay. No answer. I knocked harder. Still nothing. Then I heard movement inside. Slow dragging sounds across the carpet. "Ma'am." The door suddenly unlocked by itself. I pushed it open slightly. The room was dark except for the TV static glowing blue across the walls. The woman was gone, but the bathroom door was closed, and someone inside was breathing heavily. I backed away instantly and ran to the office. The man named Thomas was already stuffing his things into a bag. "We have to leave now," he said. I told him the guest disappeared. He looked terrified but not surprised. Then he finally explained. 3 nights earlier, he stopped at an abandoned rest stop nearly 40 miles away. He woke up in his car around 3 a.m. after hearing knocking on his window. A pale man was standing outside smiling at him. Thomas drove away immediately. But ever since then, every motel he stopped at had the same thing happen. Knocking, windows, people disappearing. He said the thing outside never entered locked rooms directly. It waited for someone to invite it in or go looking for it. I didn't believe half of it until we heard footsteps outside the office. Slow, wet footsteps. Back and forth, back and forth. Then came a voice. A calm male voice speaking right outside the door. "Excuse me." Silence. Then again. "Can you help me?" The voice sounded perfectly normal. That somehow made it worse. Thomas grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "Do not answer him." The footsteps stopped. Then came 3 soft knocks on the office door. Knock, knock, knock. I stared at the handle as it slowly began turning. Not violently, carefully, like whoever stood outside knew we were watching. I remember Thomas quietly crying beside me while the handle moved lower and lower. Then suddenly headlights flooded through the office windows. A state trooper cruiser pulled into the lot. The door handle instantly stopped moving. I rushed outside yelling for help, but the parking lot was empty again. No footprints, no person, nothing. The trooper searched the property with us until sunrise. Room 6 was completely empty. The woman's belongings were still inside, but she was never found. The strangest part happened before the trooper left. He pulled me aside and asked, "Did either of you open the door for him?" I asked what he meant. The trooper looked toward the highway and quietly said, "You're not the first people this has happened to out here." I quit that morning. 2 weeks later, Carl called me asking if I could return because his new night worker disappeared after only one shift. I hung up before he finished talking. I still avoid isolated highways now. And whenever I stop somewhere late at night, I never answer knocking unless I know exactly who's outside, especially if it comes in threes.